Protect the children, please. Me no want see no bruise for them knees. No, protect the children, please. Especially in a times like these. Why? Protect the children, please. Make them bloom like flowers and trees. Why? Protect the children, please. Me a beg you no, protect the children, please.
Good evening and welcome to our digital town hall under the theme Together for Children, being hosted by the Child Protection and Family Services Agency, CPFSA, and the Spotlight Initiative, a joint program initiated by the European Union and the United Nations, working with the government of Jamaica and other stakeholders to prevent and reduce the level of violence against women and girls. Today is recognized as World Day for the Prevention of Child Abuse. It is a day when we reflect as global partners on the issues affecting our children, in particular violence. It has been 1 year since the launch of the National Plan of Action for the Integrated Response to Children and Violence, signaling the operationalizing of the Plan of Action in Jamaica. So joining me to discuss this very important issue, Dr. Elizabeth Ward. Thank you so much.
Hi.
She is the chairman of the Violence Prevention Alliance. Also, DSP Samantha Smith-Daly, Deputy Superintendent at the Center for Investigation of Sexual Offences and Child Abuse. Welcome.
Thank you.
Shall I begin with you, Dr. Ward? Please tell us what is the National Plan of Action.
The National Plan of Action is an integrated response where we're looking at all the key activities that have to be put in by all the different agencies across Jamaica and the whole country of Jamaica if we're going to protect all of our children from violence. It has 5 components. One deals with legislation, and it looks at the implementation and enforcement of legislation that is there to protect our children. The second issue really is that we are providing the services and making sure that the services reach all our children who need them, the right services, realizing that one size does not fit all, and that we are getting them to the children in the most appropriate way. The third area is how do we strengthen our families? How do we strengthen our communities to be able to protect our children, their children? Then we have to look at public education. Many people don't fully understand the services. They don't know how to deal with problems when they arrive. They don't know how to strengthen prevention programs. And we need to ensure that the public education, which you and the media are very, very important with, is there and it's transmitted to everybody and how we can do that. And what we've been working on very hard is the integration. How do we coordinate? How do we work together efficiently in all the different geographical spheres and in all the different areas where we meet with children, where children are, and provide them with the best care and protection.
So before I hear from DSP Samantha Smith-Daly, let me understand then, who designed this National Plan of Action?
We have been working with the National Plan of Action. It has been in draft for many years, and I'd really like to give credit to Mary Clark and Dr. Knight, who was at the PIOJ. Many people are now on the front seat driving this process forward.
So it has been since Mary Clark was the first children's advocate?
Yes, we've been talking, so we're building on strong foundations. In other words, a lot of work has gone in.
Yes.
There have been consultations with the different youth groups across the island, with the service providers across the island, locally, internationally. And even internationally, we have got credit for the work that we've done to putting together the plan.
Right, let me understand then, DSP Samantha Smith-Daly, what is the role of the JCF in operationalizing this plan?
The National Plan of Action against violence against children deals with protecting children against violence primarily. While children form part and parcel of the family, there is special need, there is special legislation that treats with how children are to be protected against violence in the country, in the community, in the homes. And we are primary enforcers of the law. And as such, we play an important part in dealing with the National Plan of Action. We also give great support in terms of the outcome number 2. You heard Dr. Ward talking about it. That's improving the services that is available to children and victims of violence. Now, CISOCA primarily, you know, we are the Center for Investigations of Sexual Offenses and Child Abuse. So more than likely, once a child is affected by any form of violence, the police will get involved. And if the police get involved, it is at a stage where some repair and rehabilitation is needed. There's the need for trauma care, there's a need for counseling, then there's a need for restoration within the family setting, within the community setting. And if children are the future, we need to protect the children in a way where they access the services on, that are available through the multi-agency approach and the integration that the National Plan of Actions deals with. So once you spot some kind of behavior within a family setting, a child is maybe acting out or not adhering to the general rules of the home, there are agencies that can help you. There's a victim support division if you are affected by some amount of violence or assault as a child. Once you come to the police, that's a referral service that the police offers. And this whole integrated approach, we want to be able to improve and build on the services available to children, to families, as a support even before it gets to the stage of violence. So we are big on prevention.
Let me come back to you, Dr. Ward. When we talk about violence against children, what kind of violence are we talking about?
Well, simply, we could talk a long time, but there's physical violence, there's sexual violence, as USP was talking about, and there's emotional violence. Those are the three big categories that we deal with. And then, and of course there's suicidal violence, which is self-inflicted violence as well. Most of the victims and most of the perpetrators in Jamaica are really within the age group of 15 to 25.
So tell me about the partner violence and the likelihood that other children would experience neglect and child abuse within the context of the partner violence.
Well, Emily, while our numbers show that there is domestic violence within the home settings, we look to that, and if there is domestic violence, it goes to follow that if children are in those households, they will be affected. There will be some trauma to them, whether physically, if it gets extended and spiral to the children within the household, but or if there's psychological effect, because if a child sees something, they will remember it for a long time to come, and sometimes they will act it out.
This business of slapping a child, is that something you consider violence? Are we to completely do away with that?
It's something we have to look at, because what happens is that it doesn't usually resolve the problem, and people often punish when they're angry. And there are other ways of dealing with, behavior that are far more effective, and that is part of the plan, is to how people to look at alternative strategies.
I would certainly like to hear those alternatives, because these children nowadays, Dr. Ward, you take away this from that, you put them in timeout, sometimes it doesn't work. And I think a lot of especially rural folk who grew up on the almighty strap, you cannot tell them now they can't slap the child, because that is when they get results. So are the alternatives a part of the National Action Plan for educating parents?
This is it. This is why education is a big component. When we work with the parents and the families and help them to look at the effective and help them to understand the effectiveness of alternative strategies and how they can manage their own anger, because often, and the trauma that is there, because what we're seeing is children exposed to violence, children who have repeated exposure to violence, landed up with a lot of trauma, or even what we call post-traumatic stress disorder, which causes a lot of problems.
When we come back from this break, we will hear from key partners who contributed to the establishment of the National Plan of Action. And in the spirit of the plan, we continue to collaborate in bringing all of this to life.
1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1.
What people forget is your environment is a big part of your development and how you perceive the world to be. And the children, they live it.
I think we've forgotten about our youth. They're the most impacted by violence.
Today, I represented at Parliament for a change.
End violence really offers an opportunity to try and get the international community to coordinate.
I wanted to speak there because I want a change in the lives of children.
End violence is working at all the different levels within a nation.
My hopes and dreams for my school have to be that it stays in a safe and comforting place to be, so no one feels left out or sad.
We've seen it work, especially in Jamaica.
You have to engage the people within the spaces to find out what is it that we can do for you.
I wouldn't call it the End Violence program, I'd call it the End Violence movement.
Oftentimes, we call our children bad, rude, and even swear at them. Sometimes we get angry and feel like spanking them with belts, iron, and other implements. Corporal punishment causes childhood aggression and other levels of behavioral problems. No child should be spanked as a means of discipline, so please, beg you, try positive disciplining. Talk to your child. Take away privileges, assign chores. These are some of the ways to positively discipline your child. Let us end corporal punishment.
A message from the Child Protection and Family Services Agency, CPFSA.
Welcome back to our digital town hall under the theme Together for Our Children. We're discussing the operationalizing of the National Plan of Action for Integrated Response to Children and Violence. And in 2016, Jamaica became one of 9 countries that signed on to being committed to promoting and protecting the rights of children and in full support of the Global Partnership to End Violence Against Children initiative. The partnership, it brings together state and non-state actors in driving action towards achieving the global target to end child abuse, exploitation, trafficking, and all forms of violence and torture against children. The Child Protection and Family Services Agency, CPFSA, gets a first-hand experience as the first responders rescuing children who are in need of care and protection. And just before the COVID-19 pandemic, the National Children's Registry received on average just a little over 1,200 cases of child abuse reports monthly. Those reports, we understand, have been drastically reduced to as low as 366. They say it's of grave concern. And this is part of the reason why the conversation we're having now is even more timely. Here's Mrs. Rosalie Gage-Gray, the Chief Executive Officer, who will tell us about how they are involved in the plan of action.
The Child Protection and Family Services Agency takes a zero-tolerance approach to violence against children, and we remain committed to pursue the protection of our children. Since 2006, we have had a series of moments of silence in honor of our children who left us under violent and tragic circumstances. Today we reflect on the young lives lost over the last year. We join the rest of our partners in commemorating World Day for the Prevention of Child Abuse under the theme, Together for Our Children. Violence against children continues at alarming rates in the society. The Convention on the Rights of a Child made a solemn promise to children by enshrining their right to reach their full potential, free from violence, neglect, exploitation, and abuse. Our hope is to reduce the impact of violence on children through an integrated approach to prevention, control, monitoring, and intervention, so that children may preserve their right to grow, to be productive citizens of Jamaica. The National Plan of Action for an Integrated Response to Children and Violence is our hope to tackle violence against children. The progress made to date provides powerful motivation to redouble our efforts to secure children's protection anywhere and everywhere. The transformative vision of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development gives us a pathway. It foresees a world of universal respect for human rights and human dignity, a world which invests in its children and in which every child grows up free from fear and from violence. However, we must go even further if we are to guarantee that no child is left behind. We must put children first. We want just, cohesive, and peaceful societies. We must tackle the violence that threatens children's lives and compromises the enjoyment of their rights. By ending violence against children, we invest in our collective future. Let us unite and keep our promise to give our children the right to life, the peace of mind to grow up in a country where they can enjoy their childhood and become fruitful citizens. Join the fight against child abuse and the fight for the rights of our children, because every child deserves protection. If you see it, suspect it, or know it, report it. Call 888-PROTECT. That is 888-776-8328.
Thank you, Mrs. Rosalie Gage-Gray. We now hear from the UNICEF representative, Ms. Mariko Kagoshima, the country representative.
A year ago today, UNICEF supported Jamaican children addressing a sitting of Parliament for the first time in history. That same day Ngozi spoke, Jamaica launched its National Plan of Action for an Integrated Response to Children and Violence. COVID-19 has since undermined so many gains, hurting Jamaican families. For example, 41% of parents shout more at their children, and 15% spank their children more. That's why UNICEF is intensifying our support to families and protecting children from all forms of violence. Violence against Jamaican children was already an epidemic. For every child in Jamaica, and now in this pandemic more than ever, now is the time to face this crisis together. UNICEF is here to work with the government to turn the plan into action and end violence against children.
We're up on a break. Thank you so much. Much more when we come back.
Bullying is not cool. It's not fun. It's outright wrong. Did you know that bullying frequently takes place at school and on our playground? And more than 60% of Jamaican students face abuse from schoolmates. If you bully kids at school, it's wrong. If you are being bullied at school, speak up about it so that help can reach you. To report bullying, speak to your guidance counselor or call 888-PROTECT. It's time to ban the bullying.
A message from the Child Protection and Family Services Agency, CPFSA.
We're back with you, and thank you so much for staying with us. It is the World Day for the Prevention of Child Abuse, and we're having this very important discussion on the National Plan of Action. I rejoin my guests here with me, Dr. Elizabeth Ward and DSP. Let me just zoom in a little bit more, Dr. Ward, on what are the expected outcomes of this National Plan of Action?
First of all, we do have a mechanism to bring people together that are working on the plan, and that's the Intersectoral Committee that on Children and Violence. And that brings together all the different agencies and some of the international partners and ensures that we are working on the plan, because the plan is quite detailed in our roadmap that shows under each of these areas the role of the different agencies and who is the lead agency in any of these areas.
Right.
So just as this was saying, enforcement would come mainly under the area of the JCF.
Right.
And then care and protection for people who have been through the courts come through CPFSA. During the time of COVID and people being in very small spaces, that their tempers flare and fights broke out, as we would say, you know, and mouth mash up, you know. And when children get involved in these small spaces, they are very vulnerable physically, mentally, emotionally, and they're very badly affected by violence. And we've seen some of the data telling us that more of the violence has moved from the streets into the homes. We have to have more community support, more family support, more of our organizations like our churches and our service clubs being aware of their role and how they can assist.
I'm a little bit concerned about the messages I'm to read from the fall in the reported cases of child abuse during COVID.
Right.
Is it that the children have no safe individual to whom they make the report while there has been a drop, or you think there has been a reduction in the incidence of child abuse?
We have, after an analysis, we came to a couple of conclusions as to what has caused a decrease in reporting. While some of our avenues of referrals are not available, there are guidance counselors play a very important role in a child's life once that child is in school. And that child finds a guidance counselor as a safe person, as you would call it, to speak with about whatever the situation is that affects them. Because school is out, the access to the guidance counselor becomes a little limiting. So you will find that that channel of reporting is reduced. The uniform situation and back to school, that used to give us a big prompt. It's at the fitting times, oftentimes, that a lot of parents realize that their child has gotten a little more rounded than the uniform. And then it's now a cause for concern. You realize that that child may be pregnant. That child may be a little bloated because of contraception that they may be introduced to over the period, and those kind of things. So that avenue of reporting doesn't happen. Now, the other factor is that parents are working from home too.
Yes.
So children are at home, online schooling, parents work from home. So there is increased supervision in terms of the child being in the space with the adult, and they don't get to go on the road or get to go and fraternize with other students or so on, and get involved in the sexual activities. Coming also into the National Plan of Action is the Diversion Act.
Very important.
The child diversion legislation. Now, legislating in a way that diverts children from the criminal justice system is an important factor in rehabilitation and reaching the child to the stage where you can say, okay, we recognize this today, this activity as a mistake. We will treat it as an experiment, and you know, give that child or those children the necessary support from the stakeholders and the multi-agency that's involved in the National Plan of Action. You give them that kind of support that will tell them that this behavior needs to wait until you're an adult.
What's the rate of repeat offending by somebody who has had the benefit of child diversion and therefore not had a criminal record? Any preliminary data from that?
I don't have data with me now, Emily, but what I can tell you is that if you are on, how the program works is that once you are diverted from the criminal justice system and you get into the diversion program, you are on the program for a 2-year period. And if you, commit other offenses whilst you're on the program, you come off and official charges are laid.
Okay. Let me come to our questions from social media. From Facebook for you, DSP. What are you doing about all the violence in the country and the children being killed?
All right. The police, I was telling you before, are the primary security of the nation. Now, we don't have a one approach or a one solution to crime and violence in the country. And while we need the help of every individual in this island to help us, we promote a robust community service in Jamaica. So you find that you have community policing. That's one of the factors that we use. And that factor is to educate persons that crime and violence is really not a good way. It affects us economically, it affects our mortality rate, it affects us badly, our image and perception of who the country is overseas.
So you're not telling people they have to wait 24 hours if a child go missing?
No.
You're not telling people you can't take a report because curfew is on, so you can't come after 9?
No.
You're doing more than that?
We are doing more than that, far more than that. In fact, there is no longer a policy that 24 hours has to lapse before you can file a missing persons report. Once there is unusual happening with your interaction or being able to locate a person, anything outside of the usual occurrences or behavior of that person, you are entitled to file a missing persons report, and it will be accepted, will be processed, and will be we partner with the media, and that information will go over the media to help to find the person.
Dr. Ward, let me see if I can get this in. Outcome number 3, how practically are you going to achieve all of that? This is strengthening families and communities. You see how broken we are? How are you going to do that?
Well, one of the fundamentals is really parenting and strengthening of the extended family, because you have to find those units where, just as you said, that the child has somebody that they can really, each child needs somebody to relate with. The other issues really are multifaceted, from us having the right values and attitudes within our society and caring for the vulnerable. And also that, income support, education, access to education, regular use of our services that are there. So it's there, and what happens as well, I think, Emily, when we find vulnerable families, we all have to prop them up. Don't wait till the trouble starts. And we can't turn a blind eye to these situations. Most of the cases that have a sad ending, there's been a long history that where services have not been intervened early, and families and communities have not protected the children.
Well, the issue of children and violence is an urgent and pressing problem, and it needs to be addressed in a big way. We're going to go to a break. After the break, we're going to be talking to Dr. Kim Scott, founder and program director of Child Resilience Program, who will shed some light on the ongoing strategies and what parents and others can do in helping children and the communities to heal. Also, Mr. Charles Young, youth advocate and former chair of the CPFSA's Children Advisory Panel, will join us so we can get a perspective from the youth. Stay with us, please.
Listen, me people, and I want to listen to me good. You see, children, they are a joy to the world, and no one should ever try to harm them. Children just want to be playful, they want to be cared and protected. Now, how would you feel if you were a child that was abandoned, left at home, or being abused, beaten with all kind of stick and pat cover and all these things? Or you were being asked to go out and do a little whole house work and to work like you a slave, or you're being sent on the road to go look money. Stop it. It is not right. Parents, you have to take up your responsibility. Give the children a chance to become a successful man or woman. Parents, we have to do our role. Come on, no man. A child protection, me say, and that you fear say too. So what you say?
A message from the Child Protection and Family Services Agency, CPFSA.
It's World Day for the Prevention of Child Abuse, and we're talking about this very crucial national plan of action for children the response to violence and how do we assist its state and non-state actors all involved in this crucial program, which was launched sometime last year. It's actually November 19, 2019, exactly 1 year, which signaled the coming into being of this particular plan of action. Joining me now in this segment to talk about their role in it, we have Dr. Kim Scott, founder and program director of Child Resiliency Program. Dr. Scott, it's so good to have you. And we have as well Mr. Charles Young, youth advocate and former chair for the CPFSA's Children Advisory Panel. Welcome, Mr. Young. Right, can I begin with you then, Dr. Scott? Tell me where your group, the Child Resiliency Program, your response to this particular plan of action and where you fall in the grand scheme of things.
Well, myself and Dr. Ward have been working together for, it's over 20 years, starting at the Ministry of Health. But the long and the short is that the Child Resiliency Program is a component, or it fits into one of the INSPIRE strategies, which is part of the national plan that deals with psychosocial support for children who have been identified to be at risk and who are vulnerable. So one of our major strategies for coping with children who have been affected by violence, or families, parents who are under siege, is to first be able to identify a child who's been affected. And I think that's our first point of it. As Dr. Ward mentioned, is that when an adult eventually ends up in some form of criminality or in crime and violence, there's a long history that has occurred before. And one of the major strategies we have to focus on is being able to identify children early when they're vulnerable and provide those support services for them.
Right.
So what we've been doing is identifying children at grade 5 who may be at risk, whether demonstrated by not reading up to grade level, they might be fighting in the classroom, any sort of behavioral challenge. And once we're able to identify, we're able to offer some support services after school. But beyond just a child resiliency program, though, the concept of supporting a child who is vulnerable and being able to understand that there are long-lasting cognitive behavioral changes, the brain actually goes through changes in brain chemistry that can traverse way into the elderly. So it's a matter of being able to recognize the far-reaching and devastating effects that violence has, both witnessing as well as being actually impacted by violence.
Stay with that a bit for me. So if there's an examination of the brain through, say, an MRI, you can literally see changes in the brain as a result of the violence?
Absolutely. There's actual brain chemistry changes. In fact, there are some studies that have shown there's even changes in blood proteins that can go as far as affecting your risk for cardiovascular disease later on in life, in diabetes, for hypertension. So this business of preventing violence and coping is not just a matter of us feeling sorry for children when they're suffering. It has long-lasting and generational issues.
And the Child Resiliency Program, this is a state or non-state initiative?
This is a non-governmental organization. We work in alliance with the Violence Prevention Alliance. And we are in collaboration with the police, who help with some of the home visiting and some of the community components, as well as collaborating with the Ministry of Education in terms of working with the feeder schools that help to send the children over in the afternoon.
Just before I bring in Mr. Charles Young, we spoke to a couple of young people to get their view about how they feel about this particular plan of action, violence against children. Here's Jessica Russell.
As a young Jamaican, I'm excited to see the bold step being taken by state and non-state stakeholders to address this big concern regarding our children and the level of violence that we face or witness daily. Too often, we take a band-aid approach to deal with child abuse and exploitation. I want all children, youth, and adults to take this matter seriously. We, the children, are hurting, and our development is being severely compromised by the traumas we are being put through. This has to stop. I believe the plan is a step in the right direction, and I implore everyone to play their part to make it work. Together, we can do this for our children.
Thank you. Jessica Russell is the chairman of CPFSA's Children Advisory Panel. Let's hear now from Mr. Matthew McHale, former chair, CPFSA Children's Advisory Panel.
8 out of 10 children experience some sort of violent discipline. 24% of young girls say that their first sexual experience was forced. Of the total number of violent-related admitted patients to hospitals, 24% of those were children. This has shown the need for a cultural response, a cognitive shift. State and non-state stakeholders have responded through a series of all-island consultation and research to create the brainchild, the National Plan of Action to End Violence Against Children. Please, citizens, let us join them in furthering their cause.
Thank you, Matthew Hale. Let me come to Charles Young. Your perspective on this plan of action?
My plan of action? Well, seeing that I'm here to speak on behalf of the youth, firstly, I would say that as it regards children and violence, the youth acknowledge generally that violence against children is a huge issue in our society that has disastrous effects on not only young people as a whole, but also the society. And in speaking for the youth as well, I will say that most young persons aren't aware of the National Plan of Action as it relates to an integrated response to children and violence.
Yes.
But when you have a discussion with young persons on what they think is required to solve the issue, you'll find that a lot of what they will say will correlate with facets of or outcomes as it regards to the plan. And I'll give you an example. The most common response from any young person regarding what would be necessary to solve the issue of violence in Jamaica relating to children, they would say that it is important for parents and community members to understand the difference between discipline and abuse, especially as it relates to corporal punishment. Now, Emily, can you imagine a situation in a working environment where there's some discrepancy regarding some work you've done personally or with regards to someone else, and you're invited to the HR office, and instead of having some meaningful discussion, you are scolded and literally spanked? I'm pretty sure that to you, the idea of something like that is wild, and it's the same for children. Why is it that the most vulnerable portion of our population are the ones that are subjected to this form of treatment?
Right.
And they'll also speak to, and this is covered on the outcome 3 of the NPACV, and there'll be other things, suggestions like legislative reform to make sure that crimes are commensurate to the action, or the punishment for crimes are commensurate to the crime itself, which is something that is currently being instigated on the outcome 1 of the NPACV. And they will also speak to certain things like looking to the socio-economic conditions that facilitate violence against children, because the truth is the child that is most susceptible to violence is under the age of 14 and poor, which shows that socioeconomic conditions are there's a causal relationship between your socioeconomic background and your influence or your exposure to violence. And this is often intentional or sometimes not intentional, because for an individual, a parent who finds it hard to care for their basic needs and their family, they often they often extend that frustration onto their child, sometimes without even often realizing it. And outcome 3 of the NPACV speaks to helping to find employment opportunities for family and community members. So a lot of the things that you young people will suggest are considered under the NPACV, which is why I think it's a good and viable plan of action. But the thing is just that. It's a plan, and for it to be even more than that, and for it to have its true effect, then everyone has to play their role.
The representation you gave me about children who feel a bit angered if they're scolded physically, as opposed to being spoken to. These are actual accounts that you get from the children themselves having interface with them?
Yes, this is accounts that I've received from children themselves. I would say back in 2018, I actually went to South Africa to help draft the UN Youth Manifesto that is used to hold regarding children and violence, that is currently being used to hold governments accountable to children and violence in schools. And a part of that required consulting with a wide cross-section of children at both the primary and secondary levels. And that's something that they've reported on in every instance of consultations with young people. They will report that that's how they make That's how it makes them feel. I've even heard reports of children saying that it makes them feel like they want to kill themselves. It's these simple violent acts, whether direct or indirect, that contributes to these things.
Yes, you're a powerful speaker.
I try to be.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Charles Young, he's a youth advocate. We're up on a break. Stay with us. When we come back, it's going to be the final segment here on our digital town hall, Together for Our Children. Stay with us, please.
Oftentimes, we call our children bad, rude, and even swear at them. Sometimes we get angry and feel like spanking them with belts, iron, and other implements. Corporal punishment causes childhood aggression and other levels of behavioral problems. No child should be spanked as a means of discipline. So please, beg you, try positive disciplining. Talk to your child. Take away privileges, assign chores. These are some of the ways to positively discipline your child. Let us end corporal punishment.
A message from the Child Protection and Family Services Agency, CPF-SA.
Every day, many of our children face violence, neglect, abuse, exploitation, exclusion, and discrimination. As adults, we are responsible for ensuring that our child and other children are free from harm. Sending them on the streets to loiter or to labor is wrong. Leaving them unsupervised with underage siblings at home is also wrong. Exposing them to sex is just not right. Let us put a stop to child abuse. Show your child that they matter. Show them love, nurture them, and affirm your commitment to protecting them every day. Every child deserves protection.
A message from the Child Protection and Family Services Agency, CPF-SA.
Welcome back to Together for Our Children, a digital town hall hosted by the CPF-SA and Spotlight Initiative. We are discussing the National Plan of Action for an Integrated Response to Children and Violence, and we rejoin on set Dr. Kim Scott, founder and Program Director, Child Resiliency Program, and Dr. Elizabeth Ward, Chairman of the Violence Prevention Alliance. She joins us for this final segment. Dr. Scott, I come back to you because I'm still working around the observable physical changes in the brain. And I listen to you saying that the interventions will come at grade 5 and so forth, and you are sort of an NGO who you would have some collaboration with the government. Give me an idea as to how many people you would really need in your resiliency program to make the kind of impact that the National Plan of Action would need to see for our children to properly benefit. About how many people would you need?
Emily, we're talking about a national response. So the resiliency concept is one of changing paradigms from those of us who are preoccupied with the problem. We stay on our verandas and we say, Lord, another child is dead, and Lord, we'll kill off another one. It's about reaching to a place when each of us individually are taking responsibility for the fact that children can heal and parents can make a difference. And once we start taking a paradigm shift into looking at what are those things that work, we need to see caring relationships in our families, having high expectations of a child and saying, yes, you can succeed. Right. Getting them involved in meaningful activities, things like drumming and swimming, football, getting children interested in a love for learning. Those are things that have been demonstrated with many, many years of decades of resilience research that show that that brain chemistry can actually be reversed. Right. When the sympathetic system, which is what triggers a child to get into aggressive behavior and impulsivity, is triggered by our sympathetic response. Right. There's a parasympathetic response which happens in a calm state of peace. And it is a matter of putting in those systems in place that help to inculcate that sense of peace. Right. And there's so many ways that we can do that.
In other words, any and every person in a community, in a house, can do all these things.
Household, in a parent, in a family, as a neighbor. So it's not a matter of the child resiliency program taking responsibility for this. It's a matter of the concept of building resiliency, which is a child who is victimized doesn't have to remain a victim.
Yes.
We can move from being a post-traumatic stress disorder child to a post-traumatic growth. In other words, all of us have been through some challenges in our life. And how do we bounce back? How do we regain our shape and be able to still be productive citizens? And that's what
it sounds to me, Dr. Ward, like it's almost saying, just play with our children a little bit more. Give them an outlet.
Effectively.
Yes.
Providing them with a safe space, providing them with structured supervised activity, and somebody, as Kim would often say to her children, you need somebody who's going to watch your back. So I think we are faced with the issue of making sure that at a national level that safe spaces are available for our children in our families, in our communities, where we need structured, supervised after-school activities. Even now, we need to ensure that our children have the resources that they need to grow, and that there are different avenues for expression, whether it's through music, different sports. IT, sports, you know, we're great as Jamaicans, but we often don't move much beyond straight academics. And then too many of our children don't read well. Too many of our boys who we find getting into trouble do not read well. And these are things that all of us can help with and can make a difference. There are some key result areas, though, Emily, that when we look at this big budget ticket item, when you break it down, it works out that we need 6,000 Jamaican dollars per child per year available to implement the national plan. We have to see it as a priority and see the potential benefits that we can have by focusing on prevention. But within our system, there are a few areas. We need more caseworkers for CPFSA. We need to change from 150 to 1, in some cases down to about 50 for one. Our child guidance clinics, we have them across the island, but they're long waiting times. So we need more psychologists, social workers, and the same thing in the diversion program. We do need more of those social workers available to follow up on the cases. Our hospital departments, we see thousands of children who come into the hospitals with violence, and we can intervene, though it's late there. We'd like to intervene earlier, but we don't want one child to go home without a family care plan and a visitation program through some of our camps. Those are some areas that, while we prioritize our spending, we have to ensure that our work is done within the different agencies.
Right. So we've come to the end of a very important discussion here on Together for Our Children, our digital town hall on the National Plan of Action for an Integrated Response to Children and Violence. Thank you to our panelists, Dr. Elizabeth Ward, Dr. Kim Scott, Mr. Charles Young, and DSP Samantha Smith-Daly, Mrs. Rosalie Gage-Gray, and Ms. Marika Kagoshima for joining us earlier. I want to thank our youth, and specifically Jessica Russell and Matthew Hale, who were so integral in giving their perspectives. Thank you for all your questions from social media. This conversation does not stop here. This plan cannot fully be conceptualized and operationalized unless we have all hands on deck as we work together to keep our children safe from harm, and where they're hurting, we help them to heal. No longer can we sit comfortably by and watch the monster of violence against our children. I implore us to come together as stakeholders and partners to see this plan materialize so that Jamaica can achieve these outcomes articulated in this plan of action. Let us begin the movement of standing together for our children. And today, as we commemorate World Day for the Prevention of Child Abuse, I must highlight that as a country, too many of our children are killed under tragic and very violent circumstances. The Crying Child Monument, located at the intersection of Church and Tower Streets in Kingston, is out of space. There are currently more than 1,000 names of children who lost their lives under very tragic or violent circumstances. This year is no different. So far, about 46 children have died under violent and tragic circumstances. We ask that every Jamaican at this point, wherever you are, whatever you are doing, stop and observe a moment of silence as we reflect on these precious lives that we have lost. On screen is an aerial view of shoes, each pair of shoes representing a child who is no longer with us. We take a moment of silence. We call on all Jamaicans to unite together for our children. It is time for action. And until we have come to the realization that violence against our children cannot be fixed by any one grouping, then we will be discussing the same issue over and over again. I know we're a country with very loving and caring persons, and we're asking that we extend this to our children. Every child deserves our protection. I thank the Child Protection and Family Services Agency, CPFSA, the Spotlight Initiative making this discussion possible. To the technical teams, Funland and all other partners, we thank you. Remember, our children are our best assets. Let us together as a country work to keep them safe and protect them from harm in all forms. Together for our children. Good night and one love. I'm Emily Sheen.